United States Army presents The Big Picture, an official report produced for the armed forces and the American people. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
In today's rapidly shrinking world, the defense of American soil and the American way of life begins far beyond our own continental boundaries. One of its outposts is Western Europe. There, with 14 other free nations, comprising the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we share in a mutual defense pact. Today's big picture brings you some of NATO's activities in support of that pact. Later in this program, you will see an interesting story of the strange facts and circumstances surrounding an aircraft crash.
Flags of the free world, colorful symbols flying over Shape, the command headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Nations. Here, men and women wearing the uniforms of 15 nations give concrete meaning to those symbols as they work together, united in their determination to maintain their freedoms. This unity, so apparent at Shape, finds even more dramatic expression at lower operational levels. Here, a Netherlands Air Force plane discloses a valuable contribution to the Allied effort. It's carried a newly perfected camera on a practice mission. Now its exposed film speeds to the base's photographic laboratory. The value of photographic reconnaissance cannot be overestimated. Successfully accomplished, it can furnish command with visual evidence of enemy movement and concentration. The performance of this new Netherlands invention lives up to its promise. At 50,000 feet, it can even show cyclists on the street below. Here then is a national achievement, freely offered to the common pool of Allied effort. Behind the ramparts of southeastern Europe, another NATO ally unveils its own contribution to Western defense. Staff officers of NATO are on hand for a demonstration of a new Italian military tool, popularly called the mechanical mule. Equipped with wheels that can operate independently, the carrier is as maneuverable as its animal counterpart, and it's more amenable to direction, say those who should know. For real rough going, it carries its own caterpillar treads, easily and quickly attached. There is added versatility in a wheelbase that can be widened or narrowed to cope with obstacles and rough terrain. With the mechanical mule, mountain troops will be able to move more rapidly and bring heavier weapons and greater firepower into a forward area. This new mobility could well be a deciding advantage in any action fought in Italy's mountains. It's well to remember that these are the mountains whose passes are natural gateways into Western Europe. NATO alertness extends to yet another geographical dimension as Norwegian frogmen undergo rigorous and exacting training, carrying hammer, nails, wood, and saw. Their object here is to construct a box underwater, in a medium where anything dropped falls up instead of down. This is a dead serious bit of conditioning. What comes naturally to a fish has to be learned by man. Both mind and reflexes must adapt themselves to differences in weight and speed. When those early phases of training are behind him, the young Norwegian frogman is ready to practice the skills which Western defense may one day expect of him. For most of these descendants of a sailor nation, the sea has been part of daily experience, and they take to it fearlessly and without effort. Now, in place of hammer and saw, it's a chest containing all the tools and equipment needed to execute an underwater mission. Today, it's a routine exercise, a simulated attack on an underwater target. Tomorrow, It may be the real thing. Hands that once fumbled a wooden box now skillfully manipulate wires and explosives, splicing where necessary and connecting detonator with target. Mission accomplished. Another milestone in training passed. And now it's back to the surface for pickup and return to shore. Pickup by hook and loop technique comes easily to these Viking sons. Training often does become the real thing. Floating mines, undetected in clearing operations after World War II, present hazards to life and shipping. Lethally dangerous, they offer real tests of frogman training. On his own, the frogman must detonate the free-floating mass of destructive violence. His own safety depends entirely upon split-second timing. But once again, rigorous training meets a test and proves itself. In colorful ceremonies and in practical exercises, the men of 15 allied countries recently celebrated the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's 10th anniversary. These are men of different ethnic backgrounds, cultures, customs, and languages. Men of many nations, bound together in their determination to defend their liberties against any aggression that may threaten. These men form the strength of NATO as it enters its second decade in world history.
What caused the crash? This is a question of vital concern to the United States Army. Army military aircraft crashes are very rare, yet occasionally one does occur. If we can determine exactly why a particular crash did happen, other accidents may be prevented. This story takes you behind the scenes of the investigation to show you what caused the crash.
When a crash occurs, there are 9 steps which must be performed in this priority. 2 separate alarm circuits should be established. One, to get the rescue underway immediately. The other, to inform the other people who must know immediately. Neither of these circuits will be used for any other purpose. Crash vehicles are the first to be notified. The type of equipment used for crash rescue may vary with the amount of flying that is done at your post, but a helicopter on emergency standby will often save lives. A 4-man investigation board is on call at all times. They are appointed for a 90-day period, and several extra officers are named as supernumeraries so that there will always be a 4-man board available. To avoid losing time after a crash occurs, we keep everything the investigators may need in a kit. It will be impossible to find a marking crayon or a container for a fuel or oil sample out in the crash area. Maps are insurance against lost time. A large-scale map, as well as a county road map marked with all of the local information you can get. Farmers' names, local names for roads, everything that can help to locate a crash when it is reported.
Jamie! Tell Mama to call a doctor. Tell him to get right out here.
Are they dead?
I don't know, son, but I guess I better find out. Tell Mama to call the army camp, too. Tell them to hurry up out here. Tell them one of their planes smashed up.
Okay, Papa.
Operations Sergeant Jensen, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Where are you? Can you tell me exactly where the plane is? What is the route number? How far from the road is it? Can you tell me if they're hurt?
The alarm has already been received, and the men are locating the crash site on their maps. Very little time is lost. Lives are hanging in the balance, and these men know it.
Officer, will you please keep those people out of here?
Let's stay back, let's stay back. Stay back.
Anybody alive when you got here? Yes, sir, they both were, but I don't think that man is now.
Did you speak to him before he died?
Yes, sir.
It's wise for a pilot to talk to the occupants of a crashed plane as soon as possible. By the time an appointed investigator gets to them, it may be too late.
How are you, soldier?
Oh, shook up. But I'll live, I guess. Lieutenant Stevens is dead, isn't he?
Don't you worry about that now.
Is it all right if I talk to him, Doctor?
If it's important.
Can you tell me what happened?
Well, Lieutenant Stevens was flying us just over the trees so I could make a few test shots with a new camera. He started cussing up front there. Then he leaned over, and the next thing I knew, we flew right into the ground.
Thank you.
Now you can see why a helicopter on crash alert is so valuable. Thus, the rescue is accomplished. And you might say the investigation is already underway. We're going to skip the next hour and a half or so and pick up the investigation board as they begin to get down to work. The investigators have made a preliminary evaluation of the job before them and are now holding what amounts to the first meeting of the board. Let's listen in.
I'm pretty sure that nothing has been moved since the crash occurred, but we've got to make sure that nothing is until we get our photos and debris pattern.
I don't think we'll have any trouble there, Major. One of the guards tried to run me out of the area because I had my crash band in my pocket instead of on my arm.
The provost marshal gave them a very colorful description of what would happen if anyone got in the area without a pass or touched anything without permission from one of us.
That's good.
Boralski, I want you to go around with the photographer and get pictures of every piece of wreckage, as well as some shots of that tree that was cut off up there and the skid marks on the ground. And be sure to get information so that you can put a caption on every photograph and make a note of the direction from which the shot was taken. A picture on a thing like this without a caption exposed directly on the negative is next door to worthless.
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Hinch, I want you to work on data for the debris pattern. I've asked for a couple of men from engineers to come out here and do the actual layout, but...
Major, sir. We're here now.
Fine. You'll work with Lieutenant Hinch here. He'll fill you in on what we want to do. Well, Doc, what's your first move?
Well, I'm going to make some measurements and get some data so we can figure out the number of G's involved in the crash. See, knowing the exact force of the impact and its direction can help us determine just what caused the injuries.
Let's listen in on Major Hardy's interview.
I saw this plane, but I didn't pay much mind to it. There's lots of those little planes around here.
We'll go back where you were in a few minutes, and you can show me exactly what you saw. If you weren't paying any attention, how did you know the plane crashed?
Well, I heard it. But before that, Jamie here hollered to me. He was coming back from the barn with a wrench I sent him for. I was fixing a tractor.
I was watching the plane. It was flying along. Then it came down like this.
Muni, may I have that model, please? Here, show me with this.
Well, it was flying along like this, and then it came down like this, with one wing lower than the other. I hollered at Papa.
I turned around and saw just the tail end of it as it came down. Huh. I knew it'd come down all right, and I started to run for it.
Were you watching the plane as you came across the field?
Yes, sir. I was watching it all along.
When we go back up there in a few minutes, you can both show me exactly where you first saw the plane and just where you think it started to dive. That way, we may be able to learn something about how this happened. Was the plane's engine running all along?
I'm not sure, but I guess it was. Yes, it was.
Well, I heard the engine while I was working, and just about the time Jamie here hollered to me, I think it kind of cut off and on.
Are you sure?
Well, I can't really say for sure.
Now, when you got down here, just what did you find?
Well, I found the plane all smashed up like it is now.
Did you go right over to the plane and see the men inside?
I guess I did, but before that, I sent Jamie back to the house to call for some help, and then I went down and saw those two fellas.
Were they conscious?
Well, the man on the back was, but the man on the front seat, oh, his head was so bashed, I didn't have much hope for him.
Did he say anything, Lieutenant Stevens? The man in front?
Well, I wouldn't say he said anything. He just kind of moaned and mumbled.
I see. Now, what about the other man?
Major Hardy seems to be getting quite a bit of information. Let's see how the other investigators are making out. Borowski seems to be coming along pretty well with the photographs. It's necessary to work very closely with a photographer. Working by himself, a photographer may be inclined to move the parts in order to get a photographically better picture. Data for the debris pattern is coming along pretty well, too.
You got any idea why this happened?
No, I haven't. Captain Wright's been working around the fuselage for a long time. Maybe he has some ideas.
Could be. I'll see what he's got to say. Captain? We haven't found anything obvious, have you?
No, I haven't. I have a pretty good idea what caused Lieutenant Stevens' death and Sergeant Boyd's injuries, but I haven't the least idea what caused the crash.
I went to flight school with Charlie Stevens. He was a damn good pilot.
Say, I've been puzzling about something here. Probably doesn't mean anything, but see what you think of it. See those streaks of light green paint on the right pedal on the side of the battery? Do you have any idea what might have caused them?
Kind of odd. No, I don't know how they might have gotten there. Why don't you have the photographer take a color shot? He's right over there with Hinch. I'm going to take a look at the engine and prop now.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Stevens.
Were you out there, Doctor? I want to talk to somebody who was out there.
Yes, I've just come back.
How did it happen to Charlie?
We don't really know yet. But I think you're very wise to stay here in the hospital overnight.
I'll be back in a minute, Betty.
They tell me outside that your mother's on her way here. She'll get here tomorrow morning. Do you think you might be able to answer a few questions? You might be able to help us figure out just why this happened.
I'll tell you anything I can, Doctor.
Well, first off, how was Charlie feeling? Did he complain about anything?
No, he seemed fine.
I see. Well, was there anything bothering him? I mean, well, did he have anything on his mind?
No, Doctor, I know what you mean. No, we didn't have any trouble.
I see. Well, what did Charlie have to eat before he left the house?
He didn't have anything. I was fixing breakfast and he didn't have time.
You mean he didn't have anything to eat before he reported to the flight line?
Practically nothing, I guess. He grabbed a piece of toast as he came through the kitchen. And then I ran out to give him his thermos of coffee.
I see. Well, do you think he might have stopped at the PX or the club to eat?
I don't think so. But I don't really know.
I'll get your friend back here, and the nurse will give you something to make you comfortable.
We're beginning to get a good many facts together. And perhaps you've noticed that it is necessary for the investigators to get to as many people as possible within the first few hours after the crash, so that the information they gather will not be distorted. Let's go now to another part of the hospital, where Lieutenant Borowski is interviewing Sergeant Boyd.
Tell me once more exactly what happened.
Well, Lieutenant Stevens had brought the plane around. The air was bumpy, but not too bad. We were heading back toward the post, toward the northwest range area. The first thing that I can remember that was unusual was that Lieutenant Stevens seemed to be burned up something up front there. He kept moving around like he was kicking at something with his feet. Then he leaned forward, like I told you. And the next thing I knew, we just plowed right in.
Borowski won't take any more of Sergeant Boyd's limited reserve of energy, but one of the investigators will be back in a day or two to obtain a signed statement, which will be included with the accident report. Now, while we're here in the hospital, let's go over to the pathology lab, where Captain Wright is about to have a talk with a pathologist.
Oh, hello, Jim.
Hi, Joe. You finished the autopsy?
Yes, I just finished it. You see, an autopsy is routine on crash fatalities, so I started just as soon as the body was released to the morgue.
Good, good. What about tissue and blood analysis?
Well, they're still working on that. Do you have any particular reason to be interested?
No. I'd like to know about alcohol, and you can't ever overlook carbon monoxide. And I think that the blood sugar level should be particularly considered in this case. From all indications, this pilot, either consciously or unconsciously, set his controls in a dive while flying at a very low altitude.
Well, I can understand why you're interested in analyses. Well, I really haven't started working on that yet. Everything is still here in my notebook. Is there anything you'd like to know?
Well, what about stomach contents?
You know, I was just thinking about that. He hadn't had a substantial meal in 12 hours at least. Just coffee, and that's about all.
Well, that makes it definite. Now, Joe, I'd like to have you help me with this part of the job.
Oh, now, just a minute, Jim, please. Now, you're speeding. Now, what do you mean that makes it definite? Do you think that lack of food was the cause? Low blood sugar? No energy reserve?
No, I don't really think that was the sole cause of the accident. But the information from your autopsy ties in with his wife's story. A cup of coffee and a piece of toast on the run. That's a fine breakfast to fly on all morning.
Captain Wright has just put his finger on a most important fact about crash investigation. Separating worthwhile information from the confusing details is no easy job. As a matter of fact, the investigation board have almost all of the facts that they are able to obtain. Let's see how they proceed to fit them together into a cause.
If I'm right, the turbulence shook him up just enough to roll his thermos up under his feet. First, he tried to kick it back out of the way. But when that didn't work, he leaned forward to grab the thermos. He leaned forward onto the stick. And he flew right into the trees before he could look up again.
Sounds logical. We can check the thermos to see if the paint matches up with the paint on the pedal.
We can have a lab test made to make sure it is the same paint.
You know, if Stevens was trying to retrieve that thermos with his foot, he might have green paint on his shoe, too. You've got his clothes, haven't you, Doc?
Right, I'll check his shoes.
Well, the investigators are making progress. But the fact that they have come up with a plausible reason for the accident doesn't mean that their analytical work can cease. They must satisfy themselves beyond the shadow of doubt that the engine was operating properly right up to the moment of impact. Qualified experts may be needed to prove this fact and to make sure that there isn't evidence of structural failure in any other part of the aircraft. They can be called for through Army headquarters, and they'll come on the double if the president of an investigation board needs them. Now, let's go to the final meeting of the board. This is their last opportunity to make sure that the work they've done will be of value to all the people up the line who will use their report.
And the aircraft came to rest at a point about 30 feet from the point of impact. And that's our narrative statement.
Sounds good to me. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. We were just going over the final draft of the narrative statement that you okayed this morning.
Well, here's my part of the report. Except for our recommendations, everything should be complete.
Very, very complete. You remember the farmer who was the first on the scene and gave us a statement?
Yes.
He called me about half an hour ago. It seems that someone on the post told him the story about the thermos. You remember his statement?
Well, I think so.
When I asked him right after the crash if Stevens had said anything before he died, he said that Stevens just moaned and mumbled.
I remember that.
Well, now he says he used the term mumbled because what Stevens said didn't make sense. And what Stevens said was, that damn thermos. And those were his last words.
The Big Picture is an official report for the armed forces and the American people. Produced by the Army Pictorial Center. Presented by the Department of the Army in cooperation with this station.